Good afternoon. Welcome to this transition session for students coming into year one at Regent International School. My name is Matt Flynn. I am the Deputy Head of EYFS and Key Stage 1. And I know some of you I've met already because you're coming to school as new in September. Some of you may have seen me in the corridors around FS2 and FS1 over the past couple of years. And some of you may even have siblings who have passed through the school already. Thank you for sending in your questions. I have kind of built a bit of a presentation around those questions, try to group together some of the themes that you guys have been asking about, and we'll share some information with you today, which will hopefully help you over the coming weeks and months as your child joins year one. Okay, so we will get into the presentation. And sorry. We can go on to the next slide. So a lot of questions about the process still of coming in. As you can see on here, these are the coming things in the coming months, which probably require a little bit of attention from you guys as parents. Existing children will have the opportunity to spend some time with teachers in year one and visit some of the year one classrooms over the last few weeks of school. There'll be things like story times, little tours of the school with our existing teachers, as well as seeing some of the teachers who are currently working in year one. Obviously, there's no guarantee that those teachers who are based in year one this year will be continuing in that class next year. So otherwise, the documentation that we require to have completed to join the school or to indeed re-enroll with the school needs to be kept up to date. And then into August is when you'll get the final class allocation. So lots of questions about how the children are grouped together, whether they'll be moved around or not. So currently, as I've got on the screen here, there are 6 FS2 sections, and next year there are 7 year one sections. And Miss Leslie and the FS2 teachers have pretty much had a first attempt there at creating the new groups. Now, lots of people are asking about what the criteria is of those groups. At this age, there is no set criteria at all. We mostly try and group children based on existing friendships, which is why the input from the class teachers who are their existing teachers is just so important here. Now, for that group coming into year one next year, where the children are existing students, what Miss Leslie and the teachers have been doing so far is roughly splitting the classes into halves, and they will create 7 new classes with half of one class and then half of another. That will end up having maybe 1 or 2 new students in as well. Now, the obvious question there is, why not just put all of the new students in together? Well, we've done that a couple of times over the past 5 or 6 years. It's something that never works particularly well with a whole group of new students. And it also doesn't give our existing students many opportunities to be role models. So that better breadth of mix of children is really important. Most of the children will not notice too much the difference. It's an opportunity to make new friendships as well as retain those existing ones. The children will be moved almost certainly in halves as well. So most of their friends will be with them, and we'll try and make sure there's a good mix of boys and girls where possible, and children with lots of different interests, which will enrich their experiences at school. Now, one of the things that applies to all year one students next year is the 29th of August is normally reserved for just new students. But what we trialed last year was inviting all year one students into school on that day in 2 groups. So there was a morning session and an afternoon session. Now, much closer to the time, we will be in contact with you. And last year we had a system where you signed up for one or the other, and then we had a register for the morning and the afternoon, and we knew who was going to be there. Now, I know that some of you, particularly those of you who are new to Regent, may not be in Dubai for the 29th of August. I've already had a few conversations with people about that. So what we'd like to do is get you in touch with the teacher somehow briefly, whether that's you guys turning up at 7 a.m. in the morning and having a 15-minute meeting before school, or staying behind one day for a quick catch up, so that you've all got the opportunity to meet the class teacher before you start school in a similar way that we would do in FS, but not quite as intense perhaps. Okay. I don't think there's any surprises on here. A lot of this stuff will be communicated to you in writing over the coming weeks. Lots of the admin teams will be working throughout the summer to try and space out the communication to you, particularly the welcome pack. Anything I say today is going to certainly be repeated in writing in a welcome pack to you. And then just ensuring that if you are existing, that you've got your re-enrollment fee in place, which then guarantees the seat. And if you're a new student to Regent, that deposit of 10% for new starters is secured, and then that gets you the seat. You will not get a class allocation in August if that issue has not been resolved, okay? Just to make that really clear at this point, all right? So if we move on to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, so obviously a lot of questions are around how to prepare the children for year one. Now, this is something that I may have shared with people before. I've been here for some years now. It's something which comes out of the UK and the National Trust, I believe. And it's things really to keep children active and doing things physically rather than being attached to devices, which I know we're all sometimes guilty of. And one of the questions that came through was about the expectation for children to have devices. I'm really pleased to say that next year, we don't plan on having devices in year two or year one. Year one, we've never had devices one-to-one. We've never encouraged that. In the past couple of years, with the restrictions in place in year two, we have allowed that to happen. But it's normal for us not to have devices in Key Stage 1. We do try and limit screen time as much as possible for those younger years. There are times this period of the year where the weather's a little bit warmer, but even still it's restricted in terms of time and restricted in terms of content, what we will allow children to interact with. It's not something that we want to over promote. At times in the past couple of years, it's probably become a little bit imbalanced, I would say. But next year, for year one and year two, there's no plan to have any devices that are one-to-one. There'll be a few devices in the classroom. They will capture the content that happens in the classroom, videos and pictures. But we want children to be interacting with the environment around them, not get an experience which they could get anywhere else. Okay, so this is something I thought would be worth sharing. It's a list of ideas that children should aim to complete by the age of 11. So I'm not saying you have to tick off all these things this summer by any means, but there are certainly some interesting things on there which you may have done yourselves as children, or you may never have even heard of before. There'll be some things on there that you might not be a possibility for you, but there'll be some things that you might already have planned. So this is the idea that we want younger children to get a wide range of experiences from their education, and those people that they interact with through that education is important as well. So we should go to the next one. Sorry, that was not working for me. Sorry. Obviously, we're talking about devices and that happens. Okay. More sensibly then, towards the start date, some of the things that you can do at home are really, really important for children. And the one I've highlighted particularly here is sleep. As the father of a nearly 10-month-old baby, I now recognize just how crucial sleep is. It's recommended for year one children anywhere between 10 and 12 hours sleep there. And the difference that makes in school is really important, actually. The children come in well rested, they can last the day, they become less irritable because they've got energy, they're in a good pattern and eating well. So probably, I think I said mid-August, start getting back into some sort of normal routine wherever you are, even if you're in a different country still. Just getting children into the idea of getting back for school ready, talking to them about school, talking about the changes, And particularly around that point as well, you should have your class allocation. You should have some information about your new teacher, a picture of them, their name, and a bit of a profile. So you can bring all these things back in and start to drip feed just those conversations about joining the school. And that consistency is really important in terms of that honesty with children as well. Sometimes plans change, and children can be quite resilient with that. But one of the things we find at school is with the younger children particularly, if they know something's going to happen, even if that means that you let the teacher know in advance or you've called the front desk and we can pass the message on if they're not being picked up by the same person. But just trying to get into a consistent routine normally leads to consistent results with the younger people. And one of the things I've also put on it is a QR code takes you to a brief blog article about building relationships with the class teacher. Now, that's from a parent perspective. Children will naturally kind of do that anyway. But there's just a few tips on there, which is just something which is an additional to what we'd usually share of how to maintain dialogue with a positive dialogue as well with the child's class teacher. So it's there for your perusal if you wish. You may disagree with some of the things on there, but it's at least something to consider, okay? The transition is not just about the child. It's about how you develop relationships with all aspects of your community there, okay? Thank you. So apologies if any of you were with me last Monday when I did a separate talk on transition. I've borrowed part of this slide here from that talk and formatting skewed a little bit there. In terms of a timeline, so how will I know if my child is adapting is one of the common questions we've got as well. Obviously, you have to look out for signs. Children's behavior should be relatively positive towards this time of the year. They should be fairly excited about this change. There might be some level of anxiety, which is perfectly normal, but then there's a good balance of excitement and curiosity about what the year would bring and what it might evolve with different adults and so on. So looking for those identification of success is really important, again, as I've talked about before. And I know some of the parents were FS2 to year 1 last week as well. So I also shared this idea of perception over time, and the charts at the bottom there, this short-term, medium-term, long-term idea that, you know, we can often put ourselves in situations where we maybe overreact as people and as adults particularly, where children are relatively more balanced with their outlook, okay? And we need to support children in recognizing that there are good days, bad days, that there are lots of strengths and positives to be had in any situation. And we need to make those links for them at times. And again, that's why the relationship with the teacher is so important, because you will only probably see a snippet of their day through Seesaw with photos or a little bit of a video maybe, whereas the adults in school are going to be spending hours per day with your children as well. So it's really important to get that regular feedback. And then you can use that in a reciprocal way so that you can say, well, your teacher said you were fantastic at this. Let's look at that. Let's talk about that. So you're leading the positive change also, okay? So one of the things I shared last week as well was just some of these questions, which we'll just leave up for a few seconds there. Somebody might want to take a photo of that. So obviously this blue column of getting towards some more reflective questioning with your children. These are the sorts of questions which we would start talking about with year 1 and 2 children, and start to ask them the questions that make them think, rather than these closed questions which they can answer fairly quickly and might not lead to much of a conversation. Moving towards those in the blue column there, which have a positive maybe weighting to them, and particularly the wording, but it would hopefully attract a more prolonged response than yes or fine or it was okay or these kind of brief answers. Because it's another common feedback we get from parents is that children don't particularly like talking about school. Well, you'll know yourself from your own experience that school and home are two very different lives that we all lead. So some children really strongly want to keep school at school and home at home. And that'll be the case when it comes to things like homework, which in year 1, there's nothing particularly too stressful with homework. There's a few spelling words that get introduced towards the end of term 1. Usually the first 5 or 6 weeks is a really big period of transition. So we normally don't overexert anybody with homework or anything too demanding on their time. We know the focus is on making sure the children are settled and happy, and building those strong relationships that we can use to make great progress with throughout the year. Okay. Yeah, so again, like a lot of questions here, and I've got some more obvious logistical questions on the screen for you there in terms of the timing of the day. The additional thing which we haven't got on this year's timetables because it's not currently happening is the MFL, so the Modern Foreign Language. We expect to be able to offer year 1 students a 40-minute French session next year. Compared to what the children already experienced, that's the only change in subject. It's just the other lessons get slightly longer. Now, as their day is slightly longer, it's proportional. So the children will get used to slightly longer sessions for things like swimming. Music will actually switch to 2 40-minute sessions this year, we hope, instead of 1 60-minute lesson. So they'll get 2 shorter sessions rather than 1 longer session. And that's something they're kind of familiar with already. Similarly, PE is roughly the same amount of time as it is at the minute. It's only a 10-minute extension there. So we do notice, particularly that first month or 2 of year 1, where the children have just come back off a long summer as well, that particularly the afternoons can sometimes be a little bit long. So having that additional slot to have a break time outdoors is particularly useful. And depending on how their day is structured with specialist lessons, the teachers will go and use different spaces around the school to give their children a bit of a break. Again, the warmer months are still going to be here when the children come into year 1. So until it gets to around mid-late October, it probably takes that time for the children to settle in with relationships, but also get into more familiarity with the routine of the day and the structure of the day. So we're always really mindful of that. We don't try and put too much pressure on the children straight away. Again, the focus is settling them in, making sure they're happy, and they want to keep coming back to school day after day. Okay. So one of the things that you might have seen before is this graphic on the left of your screen. There's many different ways in which children and the parents are kept informed throughout school. I've just adapted it really to make it a little bit more specific to year 1 and 2, particularly on the right-hand side here. So one of the big differences from FS is that the children, after the first week or so, will be expected to go to class independently. Now, currently in FS2, you have the opportunity to drop off and pick up from the classroom, which gives you a fair bit of interaction with the class teacher. Next year, you will still get that daily interaction, but it will just be in the afternoons. So it's still the most preferred way of having more regular contact with the class teacher. Face-to-face is much easier. It's much better for people's relationships. You get some instant feedback, and it's just easier to maintain that positive relationship when you're having that dialogue, really. So you're more than welcome to kind of check in relatively frequently at the end of the day with asking questions to the class teacher. But particularly at the beginning of the year, I'd say give the children a good few weeks to settle in. If there is anything that seems out of the ordinary or causes the adults concern, we will let you know and have those conversations. But it's quite normal for the children here that we are spending a little bit of time in those first few weeks getting to grips with the new year group anyway. And you will see a lot of content on Seesaw, as you do already. One of the things we moved to during year 1 is giving children greater independence with using the device to capture the content. So instead of the adults capturing their learning, they will be taught some digital literacy skills to how to capture a particular activity, but also how to store it in a particular folder so it's linked to a skill or a subject as well. And then the responsibility to do so is quite a big thing that we try and give children opportunities for. Now, as you might be aware already, particularly for an existing family, Seesaw has an inbuilt messaging function, which is a really useful tool, but can sometimes perhaps be misused. So I don't want teachers replying to Seesaw messages during the day. I want teachers teaching our children. So normally what we expect and ask of parents, that if there is something really brief, really minor, it can be a Seesaw message. If it's something more serious, it should be a face-to-face, or a Seesaw message can be used to arrange a follow-up phone call. But I don't particularly want interruptions throughout the day, where unless it's something really urgent. And things like a different adult picking up can be a phone call to the front office, and that note can be passed on, particularly if it's later in the day, because the teacher might not pick it up, whereas at least the guys at the front of the house can bring that message to the teacher directly in the hall if they need to. Things like bus pickup changes, not Seesaw message, that has to go to the bus transport manager. So yeah, as we've become more used to using Seesaw, there's been a bit of differentiation in how it's used, and sometimes those processes aren't followed, so that we know what's happening with bus children or pickup and things like that. So generally, if someone's forgotten the PE kit, it can be a really quick tool to message something really quickly, or if lunch or something like that. But within reason, okay. It's a platform there to be used and utilized for simple things, but we don't really want any lengthy conversations going on the message, where things get lost in translation, or the perception is difficult because it's a written message. So anything more serious is a proper conversation, we would say. Okay. So I've snipped the top of the academic calendar there just to get you through to January. So couldn't do any more without it becoming too small on your screens. And just a reminder of those key dates. So we will send out more information about this transition day probably mid-August. Okay, we're not going to send it to you before the summer, because currently we're working within a set of restrictions with COVID still, and schools have got relatively strict restrictions compared to other entities. So we don't quite know what it's going to look like. Last year was that we had the 2 sessions, like I said previously, and you signed up, and we were able to manage that in that you then created the bubbles that the children would become friends in for those first few weeks. So we signed people up to either afternoon or morning. This year, depending on restrictions, we might be able to do more or less. So I return to work, I think, on the 16th of August. And that week, it will be one of my first jobs is to get this information out to you, and make sure the class allocation has gone accordingly, so you've got everything you need. And then the Tuesday, the 30th, is the first full day of school. So the transition day for year 1 will be an hour or 90 minutes, depending on what we're allowed to do. And then the 30th will be the first full day of school. And then after a few weeks, we will hold another presentation. Now, again, without knowing the restrictions, we're not committing to a date, because what we'd like to do is have people able to come into the school and do that face-to-face again, and be able to ask those more personal questions in an easier format. But it might be that we have to do something similar to this, where you submit questions in advance, and we build in a response to those questions with the content that we have as well. Okay. So again, the academic calendar will be part of your welcome pack, and all of these information will be communicated to you in writing in advance of you needing it. But I am aware, particularly for an existing parent, there is a lot of content that comes towards you from email and social media and so on. And social media is probably one of the ones which is easier to pick up. So we will make sure you are kept up to date as required in August. So I think, yeah, we've updated the slides a couple of times today as the questions have come through throughout the day. But I think there might be some more questions coming up here. Yeah, so I think I've covered that one a little bit. I don't know particularly for your individual son there, but the class teachers have kept the children in halves. So, and they've done that based on friendship groups. So they are not looking to split anybody that are definitely friends. They might split children who have maybe not gelled together particularly well this year. But the priority is always to keep the children who have got good relationships together. Okay. There are some occasions where if the number of sections stays the same from year to year, the classes will stay as they are as they go up. I know the current FS2, Miss Selden's class, Miss Roy's class, and Miss Martin's class have pretty much been together for 2 years because they came up with them from FS1. So there are some situations which change it, but it's not always going to be the case that all children all stay together all the time. Okay. So I'm told there's no more questions, but I'm sure there will be. So you're very welcome to come and see me or Miss Leslie at any time during pickups. Also more than welcome to drop me an email or even arrange a tour if you'd like over the coming weeks. We've got a busy few weeks coming up with the FS performances, which we're practicing this morning, and so looking fantastic. So I can't wait to go and visit those. And indeed, the year 1 and 2 Key Stage 1 B musical as well. And of course, Annie the musical. So there's lots of opportunities to see me in lots of different ways coming up as well. We have got another question. Will snack and lunchtime remain in class? Yeah, for the time being, it will do. Again, we have had no update on what restrictions will be in place. We can have a canteen at the minute, but there's not a long-term solution there in the school at the minute with that. So it's something which, for the time being, the children are going to be having their snack in the class. So that is something which is the same as it has been for the past 2 years now, again, unfortunately. Okay. So I think that is it. I don't think there are any more questions. But again, there's lots of opportunities to see me around the school over the coming weeks. And I know some of you who are new to the school, I've said once I'm back in August, once you're picking up uniform, we can go take you to a classroom that we'll have set up as a year 1 classroom, just so you get a bit of an idea of what that looks like. Again, depending on the restrictions, really means what we're able to set up next year as a classroom, not what we're able to get away with. But it's the provision we want to offer to our children. Means that there's no bubbles this year, hopefully still, which was very different to the beginning of last year. So we've got a nice big open plan classrooms with a wide range of activities for the children to be completing throughout the day, and developing those independent skills which we need to develop in children. And then as they mature, they're growing in responsibility and making sure that they're having a fantastic experience in school. Okay. So thank you again for your time, and I will see you all soon. Enjoy the rest of your evening.